So thank you once again for joining us. We had hoped to have a few more participants, but not a problem at all. We're going to share, we're going to record, we're going to send the slides, and we're going to offer this presentation many more times, we hope, in the future. And I am Alex Vasic. I'm the Director of Volunteerism here at Volunteer Success. And Aleksandra already introduced herself, and she's basically our all-purpose marketing and social media specialist on the team. So she's supporting us today. So what we're going to be covering today, I got my speaker notes on my phone here. Generally, what are the benefits for volunteering if you're over the age of 55? And a little note here, I really try to use the term older adult. It's age-friendly language. So older adult is very descriptive. I think our ideas of who is a senior has certainly changed quite a bit. But you might still see the word senior sprinkled in my presentation just because, other organizations and institutions still use that term. We're going to just go back to like basic definitions. What is volunteering? Which organizations engage volunteers? How do we overcome some common barriers to volunteering? What can I do as a volunteer? That's often a big question. And then how do you find out about volunteer opportunities in your local community? And I'm going to then finally end on just some ideas around volunteer rights and responsibilities according to something called the Canadian Code of Volunteer Involvement. And then that should leave lots of time for Q&A. So what if I told you that there was one type of activity that you could do that would help you stay physically active, age in place, maintain or gain your social circle, maintain your sense of purpose, prevent dementia even, and live longer? Well, research says you can volunteer. So I'm going to cover a few kind of like little research, or not little, actually pretty big research projects that I discovered in the course of my research preparing this presentation. I was actually quite surprised at the kind of research that's out there. So um, this first one is actually pretty recent, the 2020 data review in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine that looked at 13,000 participants in the health and retirement study. And bottom line, they found that if somebody volunteered for at least 100 hours per year, which works out to less than 2 hours a week, over a 4-year period, they experienced reduced risk of mortality, reduced risk of physical functioning limitations, increased amounts of physical activity, better psychosocial outcomes, such as increased optimism or a stronger sense of purpose in life. The next study, really, again, another interesting one from 2016, and it looked at how altruism affected blood pressure, so hypertension, in people who are over 65. So what happened is the researchers from University of BC, British Columbia, and University of California, Irvine, gave one group of hyper-intensive seniors $40 for 3 consecutive weeks, so $120 in total. One group got to spend the money on themselves, and another group were told they had to spend it on other people. And what they found is that people who spent money on others had lower systolic and diastolic blood pressure than those who spent it on themselves, and that those benefits were comparable to pressure lowering medications or exercise. That's amazing. This one, again, another one. I've actually found some studies that shows that the earlier you retire, you actually increase your risk of dementia, and that's probably because work does keep our brain active, right? So there's been a whole bunch of other studies that look at whether volunteering can provide some of the same mental benefits that work will do. And there's this 2017 study that looked at whether volunteering in later life reduced dementia. So this was actually a 5-year longitudinal study, so following the same people over a 5-year period. And the study divided the seniors who retired all in 2010 into 3 groups. Those who regularly volunteered for at least an hour a week, those who sporadically volunteered, and those who didn't volunteer at all. And what they found is that people who regularly volunteered for at least 1 hour a week were at almost 2.5 times less likely to develop dementia compared to non-volunteers. Now, the ones who volunteered occasionally still saw some benefit, but maybe not the same amount as the people who were regular volunteers. And basically, what they conclude is that regular volunteering has the same benefits of a paying job, other than the salary, of course. So it gives people a structure to their day and a widened social circle. But this was another interesting article. There's a bit of a catch. So there was a study back in 2011 that showed that the longevity benefit only happened when people were reported altruistic values or desire for social connections as the main reason for not for volunteering, and not just for personal satisfaction. So, and people who said they volunteered for their own personal satisfaction had the same mortality rate 4 years later as people who did not volunteer at all, according to the study. But here's what I would say. We know that it's not just lifespan that it's important, but health span, that how many years you're actually spending healthy. And I would think that regardless of your motivation, you're probably still getting those benefits. But the point here is, I think that volunteer work should be personally meaningful to you and not just sort of satisfying, right? The good feelings that come from volunteering really need to be a byproduct of giving and not the primary motivation. So I don't want folks going out there volunteering just because it's going to be good for their health. So what we know is that altruistic acts actually stimulate the pleasure center of our brain, which is what gives us that sort of warm glow effect and clearly helps our heart, as we talked about earlier. So I found this cute, great little infographic online, just some examples of altruism in daily life. So putting others first, anticipating needs, forgiving others, not accepting reciprocity, sacrificing time and money to help others, offering support, worrying about how your actions may affect others, and considerate of other people's well-being. So many of these are demonstrated when you volunteer. Forgiveness is maybe the one that's not so obvious when you volunteer, but there is kind of a non-judgmental attitude that we develop when we volunteer, so that's probably connected there. So bottom line, based on all the research I found, is that volunteering is a great aging in place strategy. Volunteering can promote social, physical, and mental health. So what exactly is volunteering? Just so we're totally clear. So I found this like little checklist from Volunteer Ireland, and I think really encapsulates it really well. So volunteering always has to be a matter of choice. You have to be the one to decide whether you're going to volunteer or not. It takes place through nonprofit organizations, projects, organizations, and charities. Now, sometimes you can volunteer through a for-profit business, but often it's because that business is engaging in, supporting the community in some way. Um, it really should be unpaid, and it's not job substitution. I don't want you to go out and volunteer for an organization that's just all of a sudden cut all their staff. Now, here's the thing: if you have reasonable expenses, they should be compensated, right? And really, it shouldn't take up the same amount of time that your that the job would. Although, if you're volunteering for multiple organizations, that time can really add up. And so basically, and it should create positive change for the volunteer, the organization, and the community. So the benefit should always be win-win-win for everybody. So what kind of volunteers accept organizations? So this is important to understand this sort of distinction because it can impact on your volunteer experience, right? So you have nonprofits and charities, which may be staffed or unstaffed. If they're unstaffed, they're volunteer led, and those are also called grassroots or community organizations. Now, there are some nonprofits or charities that don't engage volunteers at all apart from their board of directors. And not all staffed organizations have professional volunteer engagement, like a coordinator, manager of volunteers on staff. So sometimes it might be someone who's doing another role, like fundraising or something like that, that's also tasked with managing volunteers. So they're wearing multiple hats. And And that's kind of good to know that a little bit because sometimes, volunteers will complain, well, this organization never got back to me, and that could be why. Some of the grassroots folks organizations might have volunteers that are kind of wearing a whole bunch of different hats. It's just the nature of that kind of work. They do tend to be a little bit more labor intensive. And then finally, volunteering can also be kind of do it yourself sort of thing, like when you help a neighbor, who like a senior or someone who has some disabilities, and you shovel a driveway, bring them their groceries, or you rake leaves. So that all counts, right? So and I just the next few slides really speak to, we know that volunteering benefits volunteers, but we will also know that those older volunteers specifically are a huge boon to organizations. So there was a recent report that was done by the Minnesota Association for Volunteer Administration in 2021. So this is a professional association for people who work as managers and coordinators of volunteers, and they all feel like that they really really prefer, in a sense, they really like engaging older volunteers, right? They find this group very reliable, willing to work on a regular schedule, willing to do what's needed, willing to volunteer more hours per week than younger volunteers, and that they're generally easier to retain. So they will very much welcome you with open arms. So, and this kind of shows that the number of hours that older volunteers give to organizations is they really outperform their younger demographics. This is from the Canadian Knowledge Hub for Giving and Volunteering, 2018 census. So when we look at what this chart showed, that in 2018, adults over the age of 55 made up 37% of the Canadian population, but they contributed 44% of total hours. So you can sort of see when this cohort disengaged due to COVID, the impact was really tremendous. So there are some common barriers when we kind of talk to people about why they aren't volunteering. There's a number of common barriers, and the ones I kind of want to address here um, are about cost, some transportation barriers, digital barriers, commitment, not enough time, and I'll just talk about the first four here, and then we'll talk about information barriers a little bit further on. So we know that volunteering isn't free. You may need to do police records checks. You might be using your own car. You might need transit fare. Um, Police records checks, there's several levels of them. They may or may not be required. Generally, they're required for roles that have a lot of risk and responsibility. Now they're generally free now in Ontario, other than the vulnerable sector screening that still has to be paid for. Now, in some cases, the organization may be willing to cover that for you, so it's good to ask about that. Driver opportunities typically reimburse for your mileage, which is great. And then organizations do, if you qualify as low income, they'll actually give you your transit fare to come and volunteer. Now, if there's transportation barriers, if, like, for instance, you don't drive anymore, or the opportunity isn't easily accessible by transit, there's lots of great virtual or phone-based opportunities available, and or you can ask the coordinator that you're speaking with about whether they can facilitate carpooling with other volunteers. And if they don't, they should absolutely. Um, Digital barriers. So there's a wonderful kind of like resources out there for folks who do have certain digital barriers. I have come across through OSCO, which is the Ontario Senior Citizens Council of Ontario, I think it's called. They offer. I just saw that they were offering a 5-week series for free. Cyber Seniors is a great organization that pairs. They have like webinars, plus they also connect younger like students with older adults, and they'll do one-on-one training. Skills Hub is offered by the ABC Life Literacy Organization of Canada, and they actually have these on-demand little training modules. I checked them out, like one's on Gmail, one's on Zoom. Like they have a whole bunch of different things there that you could just do at your own pace. And then the other thing is to check out your local libraries. Libraries are actually, public libraries are known as leaders in digital literacy training, and some of them might actually have devices that they can lend out. So take advantage, and you definitely do need an email address to volunteer. Um, and
I'm supporting you.
and then
You have
that's
become a
oh,
victim yourself.
I think we just Lashonda, you should be able to mute everybody if you
Yes,
hi
go
Ahmed,
ahead.
if you could just mute yourself. If you go to the participant list, you should be able to mute. So definitely check out your local library for training, and possibly even devices. And definitely, you have to have an email address these days to volunteer, to like even apply for an opportunity. Um, this is a great way to, again, to stay connected to what's going on.
We also had
So
a question. Sorry.
yes,
I
no
was just
problem.
waiting until a good time to interrupt, but we have a question from Brian. He asked a little while ago, what about informal volunteering?
Yeah, so I sort of chatted about that, and that is really just kind of like a do-it-yourself approach, where you might kind of like organize something with your neighbors to sort of figure out what's in the community and what your needs are. So definitely, that does get tracked by Statistics Canada, and quite a few people get involved, and we definitely saw that during the pandemic. This term caremongering came up. A lot of people were kind of came together to support other people in the community, and that's a really important way that we demonstrate caring towards others. So here, time challenges. So this is another part that people often talk about. So my only message here really is, don't let the prospect of a time commitment scare you away, because this is what will give you structure to your time, as we talked about before. Most organizations are more than happy to give you a break, even a really long one, if you go away, let's say on a long vacation. If you have caregiving responsibilities and you don't always have that consistent schedule, there's now organizations that will allow you to self-schedule, like things like, food banks, for instance. If they use an online platform, you can often pick your own schedule, so you don't have to do it the same day. You can kind of work around your availability. And then another idea is to job share with a friend. So maybe there's a role that you want, but you can't necessarily do it consistently every week. Maybe you can apply with a friend and sort of share that role, and then it's a little bit less of your time. So sometimes folks will kind of like they get to the point where, oh, I really want to volunteer, but I'm not sure what I want to do. And there's kind of a number of different pieces that you want to take into account when, and for depending on who the person is, some of those pieces may kind of weigh more heavily in your decision. So, you might want to look at your values and your vision. You might have some ideas of what you'd like to see in the world. So then likely there's a cause that's related, like if you have a strong value around the environment or health or poverty or family, it'll lead you to find an organization related to that. You might have some personal motivations around, wanting to connect with like-minded people. Um, you may want to, maybe you've been personally touched by a health situation. So, like cancer. So you might want to volunteer with a cancer organization. You may wish to transition into another career, kind of like close, towards the end of your, in your 50s, let's say you want to transition to another career. Volunteering can be a great way to try out different sorts of experiences and pivot in potentially into a whole other career. Um, you may want to give back to your local community or your faith-based organization. And then you look at your skills and experience. You may want to continue using the skills and talents that you developed over a lifetime. Or like for instance, a teacher may want to engage in one-on-one mentoring in retirement. But or you may want to do something totally different, or you may want to do something that doesn't actually, maybe is kind of simple, like, sorting food or whatever. You just want to get out of the house and you don't want to use any of your skills. It's really completely up to you. And then finally, there's some practical considerations like things like distance from home. How easy is it to get to? Maybe, if you've got mobility issues or transit issues. So all of those, you want to sort of take all of these things into account, and then you research options that are kind of available in your community, and then, you'll get some great ideas there. Um, this is again taken from the Canadian Knowledge Hub for Giving and Volunteering. So this is how StatsCan organizes or categorizes volunteer activities. So this again just gives you an idea of what people are doing in Canada. So the red is the volunteer rate, the number of people that are doing it. The blue is average hours. And so we can see organizing activities or events, number one, then fundraising, sitting on committees or boards, teaching or mentoring, collecting, serving, or delivering foods, counseling or providing advice, other healthcare support, office work, coaching, refereeing, or officiating, another big area, maintenance, repair, or building, volunteer driving. Oh, there's always a need for drivers, protecting the environment, canvassing, and first aid and firefighting. Rural communities in particular are very reliant on their volunteer firefighters. So this again just kind of gives us some ideas about all the range of different things that you can do as a volunteer. So finding volunteer opportunities. A few different strategies there. So this is where we're going to talk about some of those information barriers. Quite often volunteers just don't know where to start looking for opportunities. When we talk to current volunteers of organizations about how they found out about that opportunity, word of mouth still tends to be a pretty big driver for, getting people in the door. So definitely talk to your friends and family. Obviously, you can come to our website, so I'll tell you a little bit more about that shortly. You can Google volunteer opportunities near me, or volunteer opportunity with name of your preferred cause near me, or you can see if your community actually has a volunteer center. And so there's a list that you can find on the Volunteer Canada site. So now I want to talk about next stage volunteering. So this is the website that my organization, Volunteer Success, developed specifically for older adult volunteers. And it's really unique because it combines kind of a wealth of information about volunteering along with opportunities that are pulled directly from our website. So there's about, my goodness, about 50 articles in here covering topics like the benefits of volunteering, um, how to find an opportunity, how to figure out what you want to do, questions to ask, applications process, where to find help with digital literacy and training, and how to manage volunteer challenges in your volunteer role. Plus, like I said, you can actually on this site you just click on find an opportunity, and it'll show you all kinds of opportunities in your community. So I'm just going to do a little sort of screenshot. I did a little screenshot about how to find opportunities on our site, just so it makes it easy. This is a little tip. Now the search bar is going to be changing to make it even easier for you to find opportunities in your community. But in the meantime, if you're looking for something local, you can either enter the name of the town, region, or community in your search bar, or you can click on this distance button here. And then what happens, it pops up, a box pops up. You can put in your postal code and the distance from your postal code. So it's really easy to find stuff. And then once you find something that you're interested in, then you'd click on the button that says I'm interested, and then the organization gets a message with your name and email address, and then they should reach out to you with next steps. Now, I say should because we're not really responsible for the next steps, right? Really, then it's up to the organization, and they're going to have to decide whether you're going to be the right fit for them. So they'll put you through an application process and a screening process depending on the role. All the opportunities that you've clicked on, I'm interested, will show up in your dashboard once you're logged into our site under interested opportunities. So make an offer is a brand new feature that we are showcasing, that we've just enabled on our site. And so what this is it allows you as volunteers to make an offer of your time and skill and talent, which will then be promoted to organizations. So rather than a volunteer going to the organization to look for something, it's the other way around. You're making the offer. Um, and then they can contact you. So it's a very simple form. You'll fill in your offer title, like for instance, maybe I'm a piano player and you want to perform in a long-term care home or something, or maybe you're willing to consult on some marketing or strategy or whatever. So you give it a title, a description. You can put in your preferred hours and frequency and the distance you're willing to travel, or if it's virtual, then not a problem. Then it's easy. So what would be the next steps on your volunteer journey? So I often tell volunteers that the process of finding a good volunteer role and applying for a volunteer role, it's not that different from applying for a job, right? So sometimes you have to kind of approach and apply for a number of different roles with a number of different organizations before you find the right one. Um, and so don't just kind of like, make sure you kind of like really reach out to a number of different places. Now, the amount of screening that's going to be needed for the role really depends on the risk and responsibility. So if you're volunteering for a one-day event, maybe they don't need a lot. They need your name, they need your age, they need your email address, right? But then if you're gonna go to the other end of the spectrum and you want to volunteer as a driver or a friendly visitor, well, then they're gonna put you through the full screening like they would if they were hiring you for an actual paid job, right? So you're gonna have to go for an interview, you're gonna have to do the police records check, you're gonna have to have references, all that stuff. So as I said, once you actually are kind of at that point where you're kind of being offered that role, make sure you ask for a role description or position. It's like a job description, but we don't want to call it a job description, so because we don't want to confuse it with an actual paid job, right? And that'll also give you a good, clear indication of how well organized this is. Like, do they actually have a a position description that they can give you that talks about like what the purpose of the role is and what are the tasks and what are the qualifications and what's the screening and how are you going to be supervised and all this stuff. And don't get discouraged if you don't hear back. As I said before, sometimes you need to apply to multiple organizations before you find the right role. As I said, there are some organizations that simply don't invest enough in their staffing for this very important role. So that may not be, if that's the case, maybe that's not the right organization for you. So this is another little kind of like more information that'll kind of help set you up for success. It's good for you to know that Canada has a code for volunteer involvement. It was developed by Volunteer Canada. This it's good for you to know that this exists because it'll help you kind of like evaluate whether this is a good place to volunteer and how effective is it in managing volunteers. Some smaller organizations who don't have the manager or coordinator of volunteers may not even be aware of the code. So, and one of the things that the code says is that volunteers have both rights and responsibilities, right? And that the relationship between volunteers and organizations has to be reciprocal, right? Volunteer involvement has to benefit both the organization and the volunteers themselves, right? So the rights this is taken directly from the code. Charitable and nonprofit organizations recognize that volunteers are a vital human resource and will commit the appropriate infrastructure to support volunteer involvement. At the same time, volunteers do have responsibilities. Volunteers make a commitment and are accountable to the organization. They act with respect for the cause, the stakeholders, the organization, and the community, and they carry out their involvement responsibly and with integrity. So, final kind of thoughts. I'd like to leave you with the theme of this year's National Volunteer Week campaign, which is Every Moment Matters. The theme for the week highlights the importance of every volunteer and each contribution they make at a moment when we need support more than ever. The sharing of time, skills, empathy, and creativity is vital to the inclusivity, strength, and well being of communities. And I'd like to add, it's vital to ourselves as well. So, just a little bit about us. Once again, we are a Canadian charitable not-for-profit organization that offers a free and easy-to-use website that connects organizations and volunteers. And thank you so much to our funders, Government of Canada and Government of Ontario. So definitely get in touch with us. I'm here to help if you have any questions. Here's my email address. And there's also a way on both websites. On the bottom left corner, there's a little chat bubble there, and you can click it, and either you can have a live conversation with us, or it'll send an email, and one of us on the team will get back to you.